Okay, so now that we're done with the stacking of stars, we can now resume the sucking and blowing. And whatever mental image just popped up in your head is your own damn fault. Kirby Super Star, released in 1996 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. While not the first Kirby game to grace the system, that honor goes to Kirby's Dream Course, which saw release in 1994. It is the first proper Kirby title that isn't a putting game or a Puyo Puyo reskin. It's the same kind of side-scrolling, sucking and blowing platformer that has already graced Game Boy and NES. You suck in enemies, you spit them out or swallow them to absorb their ability, the usual Kirby staples. Superstar introduced a mechanic in which you could sacrifice your copied power and turn it into a helper who will help you out by either clearing some baddies or taking some heat off your back, which is a neat feature in theory. Speaking of which, you can also block some light attacks, which is something I often forget about, but I'm sure is useful for some people. So according to the box cover, Kirby Superstar boasts 8 games in one lovely cartridge, or ROM, or whatever. And indeed you do have a game select screen on display here that lets you play all these very different games. But it's really all one game divided up into 6 main episodes and 2 timing-based mini-games, Megaton Punch and Samurai Kirby, the former tasking you with hitting harder than the other guy and the latter being a quick draw game. They exist to add 2 games to the 8-game fun pack lineup of Kirby Superstar, because they couldn't very well just call it the Kirby 6-pack, so... Anyways, as for the games, episodes, whatever you want to call them, well, let's give them a quick look at each one, I guess, and stuff, yeah. Spring Breeze. An abbreviated adaptation of Kirby's Dream Land, the first game to grace Game Boy. You play through 3 stages, the game drops Castle Lololo from the lineup and Mount Dedede is reduced to the last battle with the king himself, but you get to experience the updated gameplay like copy abilities and buddy team-ups, essentially the beginner's episode to get you acclimated to stuff in the game. Dynablade. Giant bird known as Dynablade is going crazy and Kirby has to calm it down. Spoiler, Big Bird is too lazy to feed the kids, so Kirby has to do it for her. Brilliant. Anyway, Dynablade has 5 stages and a map screen, and one of the stages even has a hidden switch that unveils an alternate path that contains all the weapons you can obtain in the game, which is nice. One other thing worth noting is that Kirby Superstar has a battery backup, which means whatever progress made in each of the games is saved, which is nice because you'll need it for our next game. Gourmet Race! Fucking roll! Okay, the next one after this one. This is a shorter episode where you race against King Dedede to reach the end of each of the episode's 3 stages. Whoever finishes first and collects the most food wins. Simple, straightforward, not an enemy in sight. It's all about the race. Great Mine Offensive. Raid a mine, seek out treasures of which there are 60 in all. Can you find them all? Cause I sure can't. Of the 4 episodes up to this point, Great Mine Offensive is perhaps the meatiest of the bunch. It's a more open-ended adventure compared to the rest of the package with multiple paths, and there's even multiple save points to record your progress. I'm also a sucker for any game that features a Dragon Quest-style command prompt as a boss you fight. That's actually quite creative, I gotta be honest. Eventually you'll unlock another episode, Revenge of Meta Knight, where you have to clear stages before time runs out, all the while the crew of the Halberd, the ship that you're invading, is crying panic at your intrusion. Oh, and auto-scrolling levels. What fun. Once the first 5 games, episodes, whatever are cleared, you'll eventually unlock the final game, episode whatever, where your usual method of copying abilities is disabled, or rather you have to seek out statues that will add various abilities to your inventory of sorts that you could use to switch between whatever powers you accumulated whenever you want. Much like Great Mine Offensive, this is also a somewhat open-ended adventure as you're allowed to tackle any of the 9 planets in order. You know, like that one game there. And then once that's done, you get a boss attack, the arena, and sure, whatever, it's a boss rush. We've seen these before in other games. And that's the Kirby Super Star Fun Pack lineup, everyone. And where I take issue with calling this 8 games in one. Because a couple are just quick, nothing happening mini-games, a couple others are either too short or fly by so quickly that you wonder why they couldn't have been integrated into one bigger chunk. One could have been a fun 2-player racer via split screen like Sonic 2 and 3 and whatever. It's why I refer to these as episodes rather than full-on games. Really, the only bit significant enough to be considered full-on games with further development is Great Mind Offensive and Milky Way Wishes because they feel the most substantial and also are the most lengthiest. And in the case of Milky Way, it at least tries to mix up the gameplay a bit. And that's the key thing. Yes, you have these different episodes that follow slightly different rules and give you slightly different objectives and approaches to things. But the core overall gameplay remains the same throughout. Kirby retains his ability to suck in foes, blow them out, or swallow them to potentially steal a power for his own use. Sometimes he could touch a statue and assume that power, or he could give that power of life to a helper buddy. For the most part, it's familiar Kirby fare, but also not quite when compared to what came before. To say nothing of what would come afterwards, which we haven't got to that point, so let's pretend they don't exist, which, when I do these things, is pretty easy for me to do, in all honesty. But see, the notable thing about Superstar, for me at least, is that gameplay feels a bit more weighty in some form or fashion. Each copy ability isn't just one singular attack, but rather boasts a variety of moves that Kirby can whip out with button combinations and such. Some can be charged to execute a more powerful attack, some can be done while dashing. You can pause the game and a little description box will explain your copied ability as well as show off some commands for various attacks. On the one hand, this expanded variety gives you more attack options. On the other hand, it also feels a bit more complex, and can result in moments where you end up executing an attack other than the one you intended. Part of me appreciates the deepening of the copy ability to give Kirby more attacks for each package, but another part misses the simpler 8-bit approach. Get a power, you know what you're going to get when you press the button. Also, I miss pressing up on the D-pad to puff up and float. Now you have to press jump twice to suck in air and float. And yeah, I think some people would prefer that, but for me, it doesn't quite work. The other thing that doesn't quite work for me, brother, is the helper system, where you swallow a foe, copy their power, and then you give up that power to summon a helper buddy to help you out with stuff. Hell, you can even have a second player control said buddy much like Tails in a single player Sonic run or something, which is probably better off. The thing with the helper is that, yeah, it can be a great help in boss fights and stuff like that, but they tend not to last long. It's very easy to leave them behind, and sometimes when they do respond, it usually happens when Kirby is floating somewhere and suddenly he's being weighed down by this utterly eventually going to be dead weight weighing him down. At the end of the day, Kirby's better off as a solo act. He can ride the occasional animal buddy, but this partner system, I'm sure some people like it, but for me it was like, whatever. Maybe I should start saying some nice things about Kirby Superstar or else people will be upset or something. The graphics are rather nice. The jump to 16-bit gives Kirby a substantial upgrade over the previous 8-bit outings. This is where you had Kirby wear different hats and things for each power, which I always thought was a nice character touch. Characters are much larger, more animated, leaning more into the cutesy cartoonish vibe that served this franchise best. However, the larger sprites, along with the added border and the larger heads-up display, comes at the cost of reduced visibility. Nothing made this more apparent than playing the Spring Breeze episode, which again is a remake of the first Kirby game on Game Boy, where all these beefed-up graphics end up giving me even less visibility than what I would have gotten on a Game Boy screen. So yeah, it looks nice, but it's also quite cramped. On the bright side though, Superstar boasts a suitably quality soundtrack and collection of sound effects, some of which are updated sounds from previous titles and others are new-ish. Same goes with the soundtrack. You have a couple remixed tunes of songs from previous games that are a mixed bag of wonderfully pleasant and kinda meh, but it's some of the new tunes that are featured in the game that are the real highlight, including a couple that would become some of the series staples down the line. So yeah, Kirby Superstar boasts some good sound. I cannot and will not complain about the sound output of this here fun pack. Kirby Superstar is a mixed bag of Kirby Entertainment software. And I don't necessarily say that with any sort of negative connotation, it's just a fun pack of diverse Kirby ideas that could have used more diversity. But regardless, you have core gameplay that's fairly solid, split into smaller parts with slight differences between them, and for what it is, it's a fine piece of business. Yeah, I've got some quibbles with some aspects of Superstar, but they didn't detract from what was an otherwise fairly pleasant experience. It's classic Kirby fare and perhaps a bit more, but not much more, and if that's all you want out of this thing, then that's what you're getting, and it's great. But if you wanted something a little more, I guess there's teases of something more, but not much else really. But then again, this is just a sampler dish of larger adventures rather than just one large adventure, no matter how much they try to connect everything together. Kirby Super Star has seen a number of re-releases over the years. It's been on virtual consoles, it's part of the Kirby Dream Collection that saw release on Nintendo Wii more than a decade ago, and it's presently part of the SNES portion of the Nintendo Classics service, and it's well worth checking out in that fashion, but it's not the best version. In 2008, Nintendo put out Kirby Super Star Ultra for Nintendo DS, a remake of the old SNES game that not only rebuilt everything from the ground up, but adds a couple more games to the mix that are actually quite different, including one where you play as Meta Knight through all the usual levels, and also as the Helpers as you guide them on their quest to become heroes, hence the name From Helpers to Heroes. Also, the gameplay and control felt slightly slicker here, even if it's largely the same thing as before, so really if you can, the DS version is probably the ideal version to try out. That said, Kirby Super Star in its original Super Nintendo form is nothing to sneeze at either. And whether you want to see it as a compilation of various games or just one larger game split into multiple parts, this is still a quality Kirby outing that's well worth checking out or revisiting or whatever. A fun pack that lives up to its fun pack moniker. And so now that we got this out of the way, finally, we can finally move on to something else, which, we'll see. Bye.